Okay. I'm happy here to have this small keynote to give to you. That's my first time giving a keynote at all. I hope I do well enough for you people. Normally I do very technical talks in which you go in and forget who you are when you go out. It will not be technical today at all, but I hope today you will not fall asleep. But let's see. I want to take you on a small tour through the past of Groovy, giving some impressions of the development, and then talk about today's Groovy and maybe a bit about what happens in the future. But first of all, we'll start in the year 2003, actually. Who did know that Groovy is that old already? Yeah. Russell, of course, and some others. Russell is on this project, I don't know, like from the beginning almost, I think. I don't know when exactly he joined and he started with Groovy, but when I got to Groovy, he was there already, and then got active for a while, and then came back again. So the year 2003, that's by the way the year the Pioneer 10 broke. Lost contact after 30 years of service, some 80 astronomical units outside, away from Earth. So, how was Groovy born, actually? Some know the story. This is part of the text that Jochen posted on his blog 1 year after he joined the project, or 1 year, when Groovy became essentially 1 year old, I should say, not when he joined. So, the story has it that Bob and James were talking to each other, exchanging ideas what they could do with a new cool language. Except they didn't use the term cool, they used the term groovy all the time. So, and with this word falling so often, being heard so often, and used so often, it had to be the name of the new language. Of course, Bob and James, they're initiators of the language, started on the almost virgin Codehouse project with Groovy, and later on many people joined. I already have to say sorry because I won't mention everyone. Actually, I won't mention only 2 or 3 because there's limited time, and there have been hundreds of contributors to Groovy. If I list them all here, it will be a very long talk. I can speak all day explaining who did what, but that's going to be boring, I think. I mean, there are of course exceptions. I mean, Russell did of course a lot, Andres did nice things, John Wilson did nice things, and so many other people that really should be mentioned. Of course, we have here our former leader of the language, which he wasn't at that time in 2003, but he joined in 2003 already. The first commit for Groovy was in August 2003, and he joined somewhere, I think in December 2003. So Guillaume was one of the guys who also came on board on the very first moments. He said he did read some posts or something like that about it, and once there was some initial commits and something you can actually play with, he started to join the project very fast. I think he did it like me. He bugged James with bug fixes, and James didn't want to do all the commits for him, so he just gave him commit rights. Moving forward to the year 2004, it's the year Java 1.5 was established. After, well, I would say, if you say the Java platform is continuously developing, then I say between Java 1.2 and 1.5, there was almost no development. There was plain boring Java, which is one of the reasons why Groovy was born. Java sucked at that time so tremendously, you had to have an alternative. And you know, in that year I joined too, actually in October, during one of the few Groovy Developer conferences. There was a big talk about doing a new parser, and I think it was already the second or third parser at that time. Chris Pryor, he had a handwritten parser before, and I think it was already his second one, I don't know. What I can say is that his API he used, the basic for the parser, the internals, I still use them. I hardly had to change anything at all for this, and that's surprising because it's very old. I mean, and I can work with it so fine. That's one of the most easy to work parts of Groovy if you do the development of Groovy core. So I'm thankful to him till this day. Only thing is I had to do the idea of the compiler having faces that he didn't have. That's my implementation, but it was easy to add on top. Of course, at that time, the development happened in CVS. It's called like that or not? It's so old, you know. You tend to forget. And there was a mailing list, of course. There was communication on the mailing list, but actually most communication happened in IRC. So if I wanted to ask James why, if I change this simple example from the website and Groovy just breaks, and why that is, then I go to IRC and ask James, who was online very often, and then his answers was like, well, an exception is valid, or there's probably a bug here and there. And then I was thinking, well, that cannot be, you know, that's not a state we can endure. So I started doing bug fixes. My first bug fixes usually were one-liners. So it was really easy to fix one of the few early things. It's just a mistake here, a little mistake there, and everything blows up if you go away from the prognosis path because nobody tested it besides the examples. It was a very, very young language after all. So, in my opinion, at that time already better than Python and JRuby. People that like Ruby and Python, this, you didn't hear that. And I'm not dissing those languages. It's just the implementations of those projects at that time, they were almost dead. I mean, they didn't move a lot. JRuby had a comeback, Python had a comeback, so even if things are going to be a bit slower in development, doesn't mean it will die forever. New people will come, take over, and help. This, as you may recognize, is my younger version of myself. This is 1 year later, actually. I didn't find a nice picture of me from that year, but I think I didn't look all that different. The guy besides me, Jeremy Ringer, I also have to thank him a lot. He did so much, especially for the new Antler-based parser, and in general, a great guy to work with. Too bad he cannot contribute anymore because of time constraints, but it was always fun working with him. And the few times I'm in London, I always try to meet him if there's any chance. So the year 2005, some crazy people thought it's intelligent to have a German as Pope. I'm German, so I can say it's a stupid idea. But, well, I'm also not Catholic, so I have absolutely no problems with criticizing this one. Also noteworthy in this year is initial commits for the Gradients project in 2005 already. So Breaks also is like 10 years old. Oh, no, 2005. Anyway, it was one of the first, of course there were many small things people did with Groovy, but mostly using it. Having the idea to do something as big as Rails was born on the mailing list, on discussions there where we had like, oh, somebody should do a web framework that goes a bit in the Rails direction. So initially something called Groovy on Rails was born. The Rails community didn't like that at all, so it was renamed into Rails. Okay. And another idea was to have some kind of replacement for Ant with Groovy, of course. And a few other ideas. So it was a very fruitful discussion back then. I well remember. 2006, the year Java 1.6 was given to us with, well, after this big step of 1.5, 1.6 was, well, for me it wasn't a big of a change, you know. There was nothing so much noteworthy in there. And given how long it would take to go to 1.7, it's really a long track you have to go. But Gant, G-Ant, I never can remember, should it be Gant or G-Ant or Russell will tell me later. He told me so often, but I just cannot remember. Because, you know, it's the idea of this one is to have some wrapper around Ant. So Groovy Ant, more or less. But then is it Gant or is it G-Ant? Oh, I can never remember. This project I personally see as the one that helps making Gradle actually. And so it's, for me, it was a very important step. Today I see it a bit more like obsolete, but I said that to Russell already a few years ago. Well, if you don't know, Russell is the guy who more or less maintains this one and more or less initiated. It was not only him, many people, but who did most of the work, I would say. And still does. I had the pleasure of having an offer from some Knopfler Just Stuff guys to work full-time on Groovy at that time for 1 year. So I wouldn't know what happens after 1 year. I was expecting after 1 year I will have to look for something else. But I thought, well, you get paid for 1 year working on Groovy, that's cool, so let's do it. You're single, you know, and you're still living on the pocket money that a student has normally. And so this was actually big income for me already. I was very happy about a chance like this. And Groovy is making it in this time more and more to conferences. Soon starting Groovy Trades Exchange, many Knopfler Just Stuff talks, and many more. Especially Guillaume is starting to do a lot of advertising on conferences. But there was not really anything noteworthy in 2006 besides endless discussions about scopes of variables. I don't remember anymore if that was in 2006, but it was around that time. We had very heated and long discussions on the development space. And I mean, there was this one conference where we were discussing about the scoping of closures, and there was one part that decided, well, we should do it like this, and one part that said, we shouldn't do it like this, and I was there and thinking and wondering if they will start hitting each other soon. But In 2007 then, it's the year the iPhone came to us. And in the Groovy sphere, actually, Cradle already appeared. We noticed, just a thin wrapper about Ant is not really going to cut it. And it's just in itself horrible. And so we need to do a totally different approach. Having a DSL around Ant is taking you so far. At one point, you have to go further. And it's a very early thing where Spock appeared already. Spock still needs a logo, by the way. No, it has a logo. And we said, on the Twitter account, it has a logo by now. It's also the year that Groovy 1.0 appeared. Finally, after, I think, 20 releases, or no, a bit more, around 20 releases of beta and GSR releases, we decided, I think we should do the step now. I mean, we did really a lot of things, and at one time, there are a lot of bugs in there, but at one time you have to say, this is stable enough, this is what we will do for a long time, and then just go for 1.0 and give it to the wild. And then it has effects like that the company named G21 was founded. G21, the idea was to have a company that will sell services around Groovy and Greach, founded by Jung, by Graham, by Alex Beckman, and not by me, but I was the first one who got employed there. After 1 year. Not really 1 year. But so I continued working full-time on Groovy already. I didn't expect that. I was happy. And a short time, in the same year, at the end of the year, we already came out with Groovy 1.5. Well, Guillaume at the time had the idea that if we go from basically pre-Java 5 level to Java 5 level, we should reflect that big step in additional syntax support of ugly things like generics, for example, which the compiler only allows and didn't check at that time. Basically, you could, for example, have an array list of string and assign it an array list of integers. Groovy didn't care at all. Just so you can more easily transfer Java 5 code. That was the idea. Back then. It changed later. And also, a few of the syntax features we added to Groovy, and then we decided, okay, it's such a big thing now with so many changes, then we do it in the Java style, and name it Java 1.5. Also, on the Java side, they did tend to promise a bit to do more rapid releases. I mean, but that didn't happen. In 2008, we have the Olympic Games in Beijing. And we have Griffin. Thanks, Andres. And projects start to use it or think about how to use it more, for example, for behavior-driven development and such things. And G21 got bought by Spring Source. Yay, 1 year and I changed employer again. Number 3, kind of. And Alex, back then, one of the founders of G21, he didn't want to come over to Spring Source, which I can fully understand today. Back then I couldn't, but today I can 100% understand his decision. But he was not so happy with his ideas being kind of ignored. He contributed a lot of things to Groovy over the time, in the few years before. But Alex is the kind of guy who is having good ideas, but he needs others to maintain this. And So he made Groovy++, because he said we need a static compiler, and then he had there things that are actually checking generics, things even with many bugs. He had starts of trades and many other things that are coming to Groovy only much later. Basically, we wanted to stay a dynamic language back then, and we were afraid of opening up a second language if we do the static one. We changed our opinion later. 2009 was by the way the year Bitcoin started, if you hadn't known. And more Groovy projects are appearing on the world. I only want, this Gmaven Plus is actually wrong. It's Gmaven in 2009 and Gmaven Plus in 2011, but don't mind. But suddenly you have things for many things. You have little tools for many things that are going to help you. Even things, I always find it very interesting that you have Crash, for example, which is like a shell, a Unix system to operate on your Java processes and do many nice things, which reminded me a lot of an early idea from Jeremy Rayner, which was called Greach. I think there's a relation. And Groovy 1.6 came out. So we are now Java 6 and Groovy 1.6. So if next year we make 1.7 and they make Java 7, it would be fine. But not going to happen, but it would have been fine, you know, that we could go along. We started with the crazy thing of doing AST transformations back then. And after, it took us a bit to clean up some of the code of the spurt of ideas we had back then, you know. It's nice to have many ideas, to implement many new features. But if they are starting to get only usable, like when I came to Groovy, which means you reverse from the example a bit and suddenly nothing works again, then you have to do some more work. Someone has to cut the edges a bit to make it more round, better feeling. That takes everything a bit. Takes a while to improve things. The problem is, the guys at Spring Source, they were very, some like Rob Johnson, he was very interested in Groovy and Grails and what you can do with it, but many guys at Spring Source were not. So you have to imagine us poor guys being like an attachment somewhere deep down in the branch of managers, and well, we just did do our job. We tried to get these Spring guys a bit more into Groovy, but you know, it's like politics. You have to, in German we say, like drilling thick planks. You have to do a long time to get through. It's taking time. You have to drill and drill and drill, and it's not moving, and sometimes, and suddenly you get a hole. And then you can do things, like Spring Boot, for example. At least a little bit usage. 2010, Spain becoming World Cup winner. And oh, there's a missing E here. And we get nice things like G-Contracts, Redpack, Groovy Serve, and many others, I assume. You know, I can show only a few. There are so many projects that I never did hear about because they escaped my attention and they probably died again, or some that are still very active and I still didn't hear about because I usually do coding on Groovy Core, and I have rarely the chance to actually use properly Groovy in a big thing. This is a shame, you know, but it can change now. Going to 2011, we have Java 1.7. Yay! Finally, they decided to have some more support for scripting and other alternative languages on the JVM. So they made this nice invoke dynamic API, which will later break with every release of 1.7 once 1.8 is out. The initial days of 1.7, invoke dynamic was based mostly on native code. So if you had the bad luck of being on a machine which native code was not supported, then you had a problem. Which happened in the early versions of 1.7 to me, for example, and I didn't have an exhaust machine. Later, they changed the complete implementation to Lambda forms in, I think, 1.740 or something like that. I don't remember exactly anymore. Which did bring a lot of other fun stuff, like extremely bloated stack, which they did hide then. But if you have an exception in your Lambda form, or you're debugging, then you have such a thing of, you have for one method calling another method and 12 lines of Lambda forms in between. Back then, the early versions of 1.7, there was nothing in between, nothing visible, because it was all hidden inside the JVM. And we get more projects. I put projects on here, it's not a Groovy project really. They use many languages, but Groovy was also one of the, they started with Groovy also as one of the main languages. Of course, GroovyFX should be mentioned. I find it still an interesting project, but I think it's not moving very much anymore these days. But JavaFX also doesn't move so much anymore these days. I mean, not anything that has to change here so much. I don't know. Caliph is, I think it was the Groovy Developer. No, I don't remember anymore what it was. I think you have to go to Ender's talk to know what it was. And this year, we also did bring you Groovy 1.8. My first time supporting a Google Summer of Code student and actually getting a result out of this. I was the mentor. She was some Polish girl, horribly lost in the grammar, which meant lots of work for me, but we got something out in the end, and I'm very happy about that. Having further experience with the Google Summer of Code, I can say that doesn't always happen. I mean, I thought that was a lot of work, but I didn't know what comes later. I implemented a crazy idea that I called primitive optimizations, which is using the primitive types that didn't exist before in Groovy. Before in Groovy, if you used the int type and assigned and said you annotated it, you annotated a variable with int, then it was actually an integer in Groovy. So you assign the number 1 to it, it's the integer 1. You assign now to it, it's not. Well, you cannot do that in Java. You cannot do now to integer, to int. After primitive optimizations were added, you could do it in Groovy Developer. Nobody ever told me that was a wrong decision, so apparently nobody does it. But the, what it did allow is partially performance improvements for Groovy that are like, back then I think like a factor 2 to 5 of Java, which in those stupid, far from reality micro benchmarks that have absolutely nothing to do with any application you will do outside. But you have always people nagging about the language, which, for example, oh, when I put a line break there, why does the compiler not accept my code anymore? Why can I not use this? Why now don't I have this comprehensions or many things? And many people start, you know, you have to imagine a new language is sitting out in the wild, and people come in with guns and try to shoot them down by criticizing every single bit they can find. That's the early days of our normal language out there, or normal programming language. It never ceases completely, but after some years there's usually some kind of agreement about that these things are really not that bad, or that's a real error. And I remember particularly well one case. He was complaining about a lot of little syntax things that were not making sense in Groovy in his eyes. And I was thinking, oh yes, well, I kind of agree with him. And 3 months later, all of them were fixed. He never criticized Groovy again. Also noteworthy, we started bundling GParse for parallelization for tasks with Groovy, and we started using the idea of G contracts to support annotations with closures in them to do some crazy validation stuff. We moved to the London Olympic Games this time. It's already the second Olympic Games, 4 years past. And we get, for example, GrooveScript, which I think we have a talk about as well. We get Glide, we get Netflix guys starting using Groovy. We get string-based implementation before Java 8. Some ideas about how to do it in Groovy, which we never merged for, I don't know, much reason actually. GVM starting appearing there, unless I mistook the date, but it's not the release, it's when the development started. And we came up with Groovy 2, with the idea of finally picking up Alex's old idea of providing a static compiler. That's also the time Cedric joined us. I would have liked to put a picture of him here actually, but I needed still a picture, and you know the Hopper virus is not working. So. Strangely, I don't have one on my laptop. I have family pictures there, but not of Cedric. I guess it's not family. So finally, we get to that you have optionally the possibility to get some static compilation, some type checking, if you don't need to compile static, like only check things. We added a lot of stuff from Project Coin, like underscores in numbers and small things that you can use them to have, for example, your Visa card number directly in code and have it in the 4 blocks. Which I always wonder why this is wise to do, but it was one example of the project coin, right? We started using invoke dynamic from Java 1.7, and for me, we made a big step, not because of the static compiler, but because we started dissecting parts of Groovy to put them in separate source modules. We planned initially to wait for Jigsaw, but you know, if we had waited today, it would still be done this way. I call it source modules. There are also binary modules, but the idea was to have some separation between them and maybe initially we wanted also to try to get more people maintaining those parts, so that more the separation of concerns, who has to do what and not care about what the other does. 2013, this Snowden year I call it, I think well known what happened. And lots of projects appeared. And I really suggest you go in Andrew's talk to know what most of those. I think he mentions at least half of those that are here on this one. Also appearing, Groovy 2.1, more support for invoke dynamic, because I do work around bugs in the implementation of Untitled Java invoke dynamic. Also, because of course my invoke dynamic implementation has bugs. And we start to add stuff that you can do more expressions of static types in the API as annotations to make the static compiler more happy, so that flow typing is working better and you have additional support, and you can give your closures more information like, yeah, it will take one argument or it will take two arguments. If it's one argument, it's a map entry of this and that. If it's two arguments, it's the key and the value, and that's things you cannot express with Java type system at all. Also in the same year, but at the end of the year, we already released Groovy 2.2. Because, big feature, we have coercion of closures to SAM types. That's actually one of the big things. Replace closure with lambda expression, think Java 8, and then you get almost what Java 8 makes so great. Of course, you don't have the strings. The strings are for me the key point in all this. And you know, for us it's very typical to not stop where the Java guys stop. We try to go a bit further, and then we, for example, allow coercion to abstract classes, not only interfaces. I mean, interfaces are abstract classes, but they're not declared. Abstract and declared interface, they cannot have implementation. Well, now they can actually with default methods, well, different story. But you don't, it was initially in the discussion to just have any class with one abstract method, and then you can do the coercion, the transformation there. They decided against this. We decided to keep it. So far, nobody complained and said it was a bad idea. Maybe nobody's using it. I don't know. You always, you know, as someone who is implementing a language like Groovy, you always have the problem that you have a good idea. Well, you think you have a good idea, a cool feature, something somebody should use all the time, and then they don't use it because they don't follow your mindset. But if people start to use strings more, and they do use it more, and lambda expressions, of course, then they will use this stuff in Groovy automatically. And the same year, Pivotal was founded. Yay! Take everything from EMC and VMware that you don't have any idea what to do with and make a company out of it. Great idea! 2014, Java 1.8 comes to us. And lots of new projects again. I made a mistake with Groovy Server, I just noticed. The same typo. And it appears 2 times. And already next year, new version of Groovy 2.3. We had 2 versions before in the same year, and then we have already 2.4. Well, new features, like improved JDK export. Basically, the problem was that in many cases, you use classes from JDK8, and Groovy just didn't like them. The meta class system internally got confused. by default methods, for example, in some rare cases, they tend to appear more and more often, so they were not rare anymore. And also, so for compatibility reasons, we absolutely had to have a rapid release, something that can work with JDK 8 better. We use the chance to update a lot of our dependencies. I think we almost all of our libraries updated, because of course not things like common CLI, which is like several years old. You would be scared how old. And traits were used. Is somebody using traits in Groovy? Oh, nice. I'm always wondering, you know, I like traits a lot, but they are more or less, but they're almost a static compilation only feature for me. I mean, we added traits as a replacement for example, add mixin, which is one of the ideas from the G21 time that never got really documented, was just added to the code base without comments, with code nobody can understand. And then you come to this phase where you have to fix bugs, and you don't know, is it a bug or is it a feature? Of course you can start changing things, but then it breaks other things. And so we decided we do traits and hope most people get rid of and mixing in all the cases they can do it, which is a lot, almost all cases. There are a few cases where they can still use that mixing and traits can work. Sadly, in November the same year, we get informed that Pivotal kind of doesn't want us anymore. They start their Cloud Foundry attack. Lots of developers go there, of course not from their own other projects. No, they fire them. They put new developers there because, you know, Cloud Foundry is not really a Java project. So they don't need Spring Guys, for example. 2015, yay! We managed to release our final, under the Pivotal roof release here, Groovy 2.4, with more Android support, meaning you actually can use, I mean, there were several tries of making Groovy run on Android, and they were all more or less horrible. You still cannot, for example, do runtime evaluation of scripts right now, because you have to generate classes, put them in DEX files, load them somehow with a thing that's called a class loader, but is not actually, and is doing strange things. And it's horribly slow. But at least you can do things like remove the speed improvements you had from call side caching in 1.6 and do reflection and have it work on Android that way. No runtime class generation anymore that speed up things, but primitive optimizations. And we did various improvements to performance, always trying to make things a bit faster. Of course, we also got the news that Codehouse is going to shut down in 2015, which, you know, you have to, till end of March, you have your job with where you work for Pivotal doing Groovy, and then you get informed that in about the same time, Codehouse wants to shut down services permanently. Originally it was February. It's still online, I think a few days. It can shut down any time. And so we had to find a solution. We had to put, we could have put it on Google Codes, except Google decided to close Google Code as well. So we didn't go there. Then we had long discussions about going to Eclipse, going to Apache. We had them directly with the guys of the foundations. We had them on the list. I had the feeling community wanted mostly Apache. I personally liked Eclipse a bit more, but they had some conditions which made them a little bit a no-go. Well, a little bit doesn't fit it here. It's a no-go, it's a no-go, so cannot do. Then we go with Apache, which is a bit more bureaucracy thing. Before we had this nice, I really like the Code-Hive idea of having despots. You know, you have a few guys, they essentially decide everything. And in the early phase of a project, you need this kind of leadership. Otherwise, your project will not go anywhere. That's my personal opinion, at least for a programming language. Otherwise, you get only features added, and nobody's maintaining them. You have to have some people who have the say that can say, no, it's not the time yet to do things like that. We can do them later, but we have to stabilize things here first, maybe, or some discussions where somebody has a final word about if a feature goes in or not. If you do JavaScript-like variable scoping or Java-like variable scoping, for example, you have no idea how variable scoping in the early days of Groovy was. I suggest you try Beta 4 or something. It was very strange. I never understood the rules, which I used which motivated me to completely implement a new variable scoping for Groovy back then. I don't know which year it was. It was before Groovy 1.0. I think 1 year already before that. So now, Jira, a bug tracker, is available on Apache. The mailing lists, so far, the user lists and dev lists are on Apache. Then what happens to the Groovy core guys, namely Guillaume, Cedric, and myself, the guys that were formerly paid for developing on Groovy full-time? Guillaume goes to RESTlet. He didn't actually contribute much code anymore, but he was the evangelist. So he's not helping the project code-wise, fixing bugs or something, not much at least. But it's very important for language to have presence at conferences. Of course, on Groovy conferences there should be some presence of Groovy, that's obvious. But on Java 1, for example, or some more Java-oriented things to make people aware of new features, of new ideas. By now almost everyone has heard about Groovy. It's not a thing about making it known to other people anymore, but you have to still encourage people to actually try it. So, Cedric Sims goes to Bradle, I hear. Me, I haven't decided yet what I do. I take a bit of holiday first. You have to imagine, I worked over 10 years for Groovy, and I made maybe 2 times a holiday in that time. And I have family now, which makes even holiday not so relaxing. So what does it mean to be Apache? It means you have contributor license agreement suddenly, kind of. You have to say to Apache, you will agree to the terms and contribute code to them. So it belongs to Apache. You have to make up that with your employer also. They have to ensure that you are allowed to do that. Technically, you had to do this kind of thing before for Groovy 2, but we did it more or less in an overall explanation of that if you contribute code to this one, It's on the Apache license, and we try to make you aware about its Apache license, and that your code will be on Apache license, that your changes will be in Apache license, and it's Apache license for the community, not for you or your employer. But, you know, Apache is a bit more about bureaucracy, so they need a paper. Eclipse, by the way, as well. Being at Apache means there's only the community. In Apache thinking, it seems sometimes community is mostly those guys that have commit rights, and you have to have many, many people to commit rights, where I don't agree a lot. I mean, community is all people that care about it, for me, and it's good to have people with commit rights if they do actual work. If they don't do work, then I don't see why they should have commit rights. There should be some privilege to it. No, not contribute a few lines, get commit rights, and then vanish for a few years, and then think you can come back. Of course, in other cases, it's like, for example, for John Wilson, he disappeared for a while, came back, and did a lot of stuff, especially fighting with me about things about how the beta class should be. I had a lot of discussions with him. But he made many nice contributions, and there are other people like that. But mostly, the community are all of you, and all of you can contribute easily to pull requests, for example. And I hope you as the community will help Groovy to get forward and contribute to the project in the long term. For example, by taking any issue in our bug tracker, taking a look at it, maybe putting it on a mailing list and asking why this fails and where they should look at, and depending on what bug you took. I mean, I suggest you take a random bug, and if it's a bytecode bug, you have to learn a lot. But, you know, once you're in, you can do a lot of things there that many other people don't have the time anymore. Depending only on a few committers who do all the work, tends to be a problem, a breaking point, because if they don't have the time anymore, the project has a problem and needs new people. It's a very typical problem for open source projects in that students tend to make such new projects. They're cool, they work fine and all, and then they stop studying, don't get a job, and cannot contribute to their own project anymore. And then you have like people like the Kadi Foundation that needs to find new people for the project because they decided to put this thing in one of their desktop staffs. So I suggest you go, take one issue out there, look at it, discuss with us how to solve it. I suggest you discuss how to solve it because some are really difficult, and if you start fixing without doing anything, then it could be a problem with lots of work doing there and then not getting accepted because it has so many side effects that you can do. And in total, I can see, I want to say, I am very curious how 2015 will develop. I said Groovy past and future for this for this talk, but I cannot predict the future. Moving to Apache is a big step, and I hope the community will go with us there and actually become more active than in the past, and then help us getting everything done in Groovy nicely, better than before actually, I hope, because we were really overloaded back then. Having 2 full-time people working on Groovy is not enough. You need at least 3 or 4 normally to even fix all the bugs, and then you cannot implement all the features you would like to have and imagine. Again, it's your turn actually. Be the although people from Groovy will help supporting you with everything we can. But of course, the time will be more limited than before, and then you have to also do a bit work. Cannot let only us do it. Or you are going to pay us. It's another alternative. You can do that. Anyway, I thank you very much for listening to me.